Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live at the court of King Zhou of Shang? A place where a careless word could summon death, and ministers plotted with smiles that hid daggers. Imagine a world where favors were fleeting, alliances were fragile, and even a minor mistake could cost you everything. In this story, you will step into the shoes of a young court official who must navigate the treacherous corridors of power, survive deadly intrigues, and witness punishments so cruel that they haunt the living. This is not just a tale of history, it is a journey into fear, cunning, and the dark art of survival in one of the most ruthless courts in ancient China. Before we start our story about Court of the King of Zhou, get into bed more comfortably, relax, you can turn on white noise in the background for more relaxation. Also, don't forget to support me with a like and a subscription. I'm always curious about where and at what time people are listening to me, write in the comments. Sweet dreams. The palace gates loomed over you, ancient and formidable, bronze studs gleaming faintly in the early morning light. As you stepped across the threshold, a shiver ran down your spine. The air was heavy, a mixture of incense, polished wood, and a faint metallic scent of tension. You were not yet a part of this court, yet already you felt its cold, inescapable grip. One wrong glance, one careless word, and you could vanish without a trace, as countless others had. Servants hurried past, carrying baskets of silk, trays of fruit, and scrolls sealed with crimson wax. Their movements were quick and deliberate, their eyes constantly flicking toward the towering doors through which ministers and nobles passed. Whispers filled the courtyard, soft as the rustle of silk but sharp as a dagger. Some spoke of new appointments, others of secret punishments, and a few dared to whisper about the king himself, though such words could be fatal. A tall guard with polished armor stepped forward, expressionless, and beckoned you with a gloved hand. "Minister Wei awaits you," he said. His voice was polite, but the underlying coldness made your pulse quicken. You followed him through the winding corridors, the sound of your footsteps echoing unnaturally against marble floors. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner hiding watchful eyes. The chamber of Minister Wei was immense, decorated with tapestries depicting battles long past. The figures of generals and warriors seemed to glare at you as you entered, silent witnesses to the countless schemes and betrayals that had unfolded here. Minister Wei himself sat behind a lacquered desk, his gaze sharp, calculating. The faintest curve of his lips suggested amusement, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "So," he began, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic, "you are new to the court. You must understand something immediately, here, nothing is as it seems. Every gesture, every word, even your silence, is observed. Friends are rare, enemies are everywhere, and one mistake can be your last." You swallowed hard, nodding. Already, your senses were alert to the subtle dangers in the room, the servant holding a tray too close to his eyes, as if ready to overhear, the way a scroll trembled in the hands of an attendant, betraying nervous anticipation. Minister Wei's gaze swept over you like a blade, reading every tension, every flicker of fear. You will observe. You will learn. And you will survive, or you will not. He leaned back slightly, as if satisfied that you understood the gravity of your situation. Then, with a flick of his hand, he dismissed you, but the weight of his warning remained, pressing down on you like an invisible hand. As you exited the chamber, the corridors seemed even longer, the shadows darker. You passed by nobles who smiled too brightly, whispered too discreetly, and glanced at you with suspicion. You realized quickly that every smile could hide a threat, every compliment a trap. Even the architecture itself seemed designed to remind you of your vulnerability, towering pillars, narrow staircases, hidden alcoves. By the time you reached your assigned quarters, your mind was racing. Survival at King Zhou's court would require cunning, patience, and a constant awareness of danger. One misstep could mean humiliation, imprisonment, or death. Yet amidst the fear, there was a strange exhilaration, the sense that every action, every decision, mattered profoundly. You were part of something larger than yourself, a deadly game of power, and only those who played it carefully could hope to endure. That night, as the moon rose above the palace and cast silver light across the courtyard, you lay awake, listening to distant voices, the faint scrape of sandals against stone, the occasional sharp bark of a guard. The court of King Zhou was alive, restless, and merciless. And now, you were part of it. Tomorrow, your lessons would begin. Every whisper could be a warning. Every smile could be a snare. And every shadow could hide your doom. The next morning, sunlight streamed into your quarters through lattice windows, painting the room in a warm, deceptive glow. Yet warmth was a stranger here. The palace, for all its splendor, felt like a gilded cage. As you dressed in the simple robes provided to new officials, the memory of Minister Wei's words lingered. Every gesture, every word, even your silence, is observed. Stepping into the courtyard, you were immediately struck by the subtle hierarchy of the court. Nobles walked with carefully measured steps, their robes rustling softly, signaling rank and wealth. Servants moved like shadows at their feet, bowing and retreating before even the faintest glance. The air buzzed with tension, as if everyone were aware of some invisible line, the crossing of which could spell disaster. You were assigned a mentor for your first days, a junior scribe named Lien, who had survived at court for nearly 3 years. His face was pale and lined with worry despite his youth. "Do not trust anyone," he whispered as he led you through the corridors. "Even smiles can be weapons here. And laughter is often the prelude to disaster." He stopped before a group of ministers, all engaged in hushed conversation. Their voices were low, but the air around them seemed charged, sharp. One minister, a plump man with a well-groomed beard, gestured subtly toward another, whose hand twitched nervously at his side. The words were indecipherable to you, yet the tension was palpable. Lien leaned closer. "They plot, even now. Alliances form and break within hours. Keep your eyes open. Learn the cues. Your survival depends on reading them correctly." Lunch was a quiet affair in a separate hall, where only junior officials dined. You noticed immediately that even here, politeness carried weight. A servant poured tea with meticulous care, and a misstep, spilling even a single drop, would earn a sharp glare or whispered reprimand. Every movement was scrutinized. You began to understand that the smallest action could be interpreted as disrespect, ambition, or even treachery. After the meal, Lien took you to the archives. Ancient scrolls lined the walls, detailing laws, edicts, and the king's previous punishments. Some were simple fines, but many were brutal: lacerations, imprisonment in underground cells, public humiliation. You shivered at the thought that even minor offenses, perhaps unintentional, could lead to such fates. "Knowledge is power," Lien said quietly, "and here, ignorance is death." As the day progressed, you were introduced to other officials, each presenting themselves with carefully measured words. Some were warm, others cold. You noticed how their eyes flicked toward one another, searching for cues, measuring loyalty and weakness. Every conversation was a test, every smile a calculated choice. One misstep could reveal your inexperience, marking you as a target. By afternoon, rumors had begun to circulate about a recent punishment. A young clerk had been accused of misfiling documents, and though the details were scarce, you could see the fear ripple through the hallways. Whispers suggested he would be publicly beaten the next morning. You felt a cold chill. The lesson was clear: in this court, nothing was trivial, and cruelty was not just common, it was expected. That evening, as you returned to your quarters, you passed through the hall where Minister Wei had met you. His gaze seemed to follow you, sharp and calculating. Perhaps he observed every new official personally, or perhaps the palace itself had eyes. The truth was unimportant. What mattered was survival, and survival here demanded constant vigilance. As you lay on your thin mat, the sounds of the palace settling into night enveloped you. Faint whispers, the scrape of sandals on stone, the distant bark of dogs, every sound hinted at stories of betrayal and cunning. Sleep was uneasy, but it came with the understanding that tomorrow would bring new lessons, new dangers, and new opportunities to prove that you could navigate this labyrinth of intrigue. The court was not just a place of power, it was a living, breathing trap. And you had stepped inside. By mid-morning, a summons arrived, crisp and commanding. You were to attend a banquet in the Eastern Hall, hosted by Minister Zhou, a man renowned for both his wealth and his ruthlessness. The corridors leading to the hall were crowded with officials, each moving with calculated grace, their robes whispering secrets with every step. You felt the familiar prickling of anxiety. A banquet at the court was never just a meal, it was a battlefield of wit, influence, and hidden threats. The hall itself was grand beyond imagination, chandeliers of carved jade and gold illuminating a sea of polished floors. Long tables were laden with exquisite delicacies, roasted birds, spiced meats, fruits glistening with syrup, and wine that shimmered like liquid rubies. The aroma was intoxicating, but beneath the opulence lay the subtle tension of a minefield. Every bite, every toast, every gesture could be noted, and judged. Minister Zhou greeted you with a smile that barely touched his eyes. "Ah, a new face at court," he said, voice smooth as silk. "Come, join us. Observe, speak little, and taste everything. That is the rule for newcomers." You bowed deeply, heart pounding, noting the eyes of other ministers shifting toward you, some curious, others calculating. You were seated beside a senior advisor, a thin, hawk-like man named Qin. His sharp eyes flicked over you, sizing up every micro-expression. "Do not eat too eagerly, nor too sparingly," he whispered. "Both signal something: greed, humility, ambition. Speak when spoken to, but weigh every word. Here, etiquette is survival." As the meal progressed, you observed carefully. Ministers raised cups in delicate, choreographed toasts. Compliments were exchanged with smiles that barely concealed disdain. A slip of the tongue by one official drew a subtle glance from another, a minor stumble of a foot drew a barely perceptible shiver from someone else. Each reaction was a story, a subtle maneuver in the unending dance of influence and fear. You noticed a young official across the table, fidgeting and knocking over a small dish. Gasps rippled quietly, quickly masked by laughter. Yet the incident spoke volumes, mistakes were magnified, and judgment was relentless. You realized that even a trivial error could ripple through the court, altering alliances and reputations with frightening speed. Midway through the banquet, Minister Zhou stood, raising his cup in a ceremonial gesture. "We are gathered not only to feast but to witness the harmony of our court," he proclaimed. Yet beneath the grandiose words, the tension thickened. Whispers flew like shadows across the hall, rumors of disfavor, impending punishments, and hidden betrayals. Each word, though spoken quietly, carried the weight of potential doom. Later, as dishes were cleared, a subtle signal passed among a few ministers. You could not decipher it fully, but the significance was undeniable. Lien's earlier words returned to your mind: watch for patterns, and listen to the silences. They speak louder than words. Every pause, every glance, every slight nod could conceal a plot, or an opportunity. When the banquet ended, you walked back through the corridors with heightened awareness. Shadows seemed deeper, and even the gentle breeze through open windows felt like a messenger of secrets. You realized that life at the court was a constant performance, a balancing act between humility and cunning, between fear and audacity. Returning to your quarters, you could not escape the feeling that tonight, someone would test you. Perhaps subtly, perhaps openly. The court had a rhythm, and you were now a part of its pulse, fragile, observant, and exposed. Sleep was difficult, every creak of the palace, every distant voice, reminded you that safety was temporary, trust was rare, and the next challenge could come from any corner of this labyrinth of power. The court of King Zhou was teaching you, relentlessly, that survival was not about strength, nor knowledge alone, it was about perception, timing, and the ability to read shadows where no light reached. And tonight, you would dream of whispers, hidden messages, and the constant, inescapable presence of danger. By mid-morning, a summons arrived, crisp and commanding. You were to attend a banquet in the Eastern Hall, hosted by Minister Zhou, a man renowned for both his wealth and his ruthlessness. The corridors leading to the hall were crowded with officials, each moving with calculated grace, their robes whispering secrets with every step. You felt the familiar prickling of anxiety. A banquet at the court was never just a meal, it was a battlefield of wit, influence, and hidden threats. The hall itself was grand beyond imagination, chandeliers of carved jade and gold illuminating a sea of polished floors. Long tables were laden with exquisite delicacies, roasted birds, spiced meats, fruits glistening with syrup, and wine that shimmered like liquid rubies. The aroma was intoxicating, but beneath the opulence lay the subtle tension of a minefield. Every bite, every toast, every gesture could be noted, and judged. Minister Zhou greeted you with a smile that barely touched his eyes. "Ah, a new face at court," he said, voice smooth as silk. "Come, join us. Observe, speak little, and taste everything. That is the rule for newcomers." You bowed deeply, heart pounding, noting the eyes of other ministers shifting toward you, some curious, others calculating. You were seated beside a senior advisor, a thin, hawk-like man named Qin. His sharp eyes flicked over you, sizing up every micro-expression. "Do not eat too eagerly, nor too sparingly," he whispered. "Both signal something: greed, humility, ambition. Speak when spoken to, but weigh every word. Here, etiquette is survival." As the meal progressed, you observed carefully. Ministers raised cups in delicate, choreographed toasts. Compliments were exchanged with smiles that barely concealed disdain. A slip of the tongue by one official drew a subtle glance from another, a minor stumble of a foot drew a barely perceptible shiver from someone else. Each reaction was a story, a subtle maneuver in the unending dance of influence and fear. You noticed a young official across the table, fidgeting and knocking over a small dish. Gasps rippled quietly, quickly masked by laughter. Yet the incident spoke volumes, mistakes were magnified, and judgment was relentless. You realized that even a trivial error could ripple through the court, altering alliances and reputations with frightening speed. Midway through the banquet, Minister Zhao stood, raising his cup in a ceremonial gesture. "We are gathered not only to feast but to witness the harmony of our court," he proclaimed. Yet beneath the grandiose words, the tension thickened. Whispers flew like shadows across the hall, rumors of disfavor, impending punishments, and hidden betrayals. Each word, though spoken quietly, carried the weight of potential doom. Later, as dishes were cleared, a subtle signal passed among a few ministers. You could not decipher it fully, but the significance was undeniable. Lien's earlier words returned to your mind: "Watch for patterns, and listen to the silences. They speak louder than words." Every pause, every glance, every slight nod could conceal a plot, or an opportunity. When the banquet ended, you walked back through the corridors with heightened awareness. Shadows seemed deeper, and even the gentle breeze through open windows felt like a messenger of secrets. You realized that life at the court was a constant performance, a balancing act between humility and cunning, between fear and audacity. Returning to your quarters, you could not escape the feeling that tonight, someone would test you. Perhaps subtly, perhaps openly. The court had a rhythm, and you were now a part of its pulse, fragile, observant, and exposed. Sleep was difficult, every creak of the palace, every distant voice, reminded you that safety was temporary, trust was rare, and the next challenge could come from any corner of this labyrinth of power. The court of King Zhou was teaching you, relentlessly, that survival was not about strength, nor knowledge alone, it was about perception, timing, and the ability to read shadows where no light reached. And tonight, you would dream of whispers, hidden messages, and the constant, inescapable presence of danger. The following morning, the palace corridors were unusually tense. Servants scurried in hushed haste, and even the birds in the courtyard seemed quieter than usual. Whispers floated through the air, like a cold wind threading its way through every hallway, carrying rumors that chilled the blood. A young clerk, it was said, had been accused of misfiling an imperial edict. His fate was uncertain, but the talk among officials suggested that punishment was imminent, and merciless. You felt a knot tighten in your stomach. The court of King Zhou was already proving to be a treacherous place, and this was a vivid demonstration. A single mistake, unnoticed by most, could cascade into disaster. Lien appeared at your side, his face pale and tense. "Do not let curiosity guide you too openly," he whispered. "Rumors are weapons here, sharper than swords. Listen, but never repeat what you hear unless you wish to test fate." Even as you walked, you noticed the subtle ways in which officials reacted. Some avoided the hall where the accused clerk had been summoned. Others whispered in corners, their eyes darting toward each passing superior. Every glance seemed loaded with significance. Every frown or forced smile hinted at alliances, threats, or silent judgments. The palace had become a living web of observation, each thread taut with tension, ready to snap at the slightest disturbance. By mid-morning, the court was gathered in a spacious hall, the walls adorned with intricate tapestries depicting glorious victories. At the far end, a small group of guards escorted the accused clerk, his steps faltering, head bowed. The officials present exchanged quick glances, some sympathetic, others coldly indifferent. Whispers swirled around you. "He misfiled the imperial decree. He offended Minister Gao. No one is safe." The king did not appear. Yet his presence was felt in every measured step of the guards, every formal bow, every tightening of lips among the officials. The clerk knelt before a platform, awaiting judgment. A minister stepped forward, reading aloud the charges with deliberate precision. You noted the small shifts in posture, the tightening of fists, the flick of an eyebrow here and there. Every subtle cue spoke of power, fear, and hidden alliances. When the king's decree finally arrived, it was severe. The clerk would be publicly flogged and imprisoned in the palace's underground cells, a punishment both humiliating and excruciatingly painful. His trembling was evident, but so too was the message to all present: mistakes, no matter how small, were intolerable. The court had sent a clear signal. You left the hall with a sense of foreboding. Even from a distance, you could hear the faint echo of the clerk's cries as he was led away. Each sound was a reminder of the stakes at play. Lien's earlier warnings rang in your ears: knowledge is power. Observation is survival. Forget either, and you may not last a day. Throughout the day, the incident dominated conversations, though veiled in caution. Officials measured their words carefully, speaking in phrases that could be interpreted multiple ways. Every discussion was an exercise in navigation, avoiding missteps, reading hidden meanings, and assessing the loyalties of those nearby. You began to see patterns in the chaos: who spoke first, whose gaze lingered on whom, the subtle shifts in alliances that could turn a friendly smile into a deadly trap. By evening, you retreated to your quarters, exhausted not from labor but from the mental strain of constant vigilance. The palace was alive with whispers, plotting, and fear. Even the walls seemed to harbor secrets, listening and recording every slip, every word. As you lay on your thin mat, the events of the day replayed relentlessly in your mind. Survival at King Zhou's court required more than obedience; it demanded intuition, patience, and the unerring ability to perceive danger before it found you. Tomorrow, you realized, would bring new tests. Perhaps subtle, perhaps deadly. The lessons of the court were unending, each designed to sharpen your awareness or punish your complacency. And you understood, with a cold certainty, that no one, no matter how high their rank, was truly safe. The shadows of the palace lengthened as night fell, and you drifted into uneasy sleep, haunted by whispers of execution, the flick of a minister's gaze, and the ever-present reminder that in this place, life and death were decided as much by perception as by action. The morning light revealed a palace buzzing with subtle tension, an energy you had begun to recognize as both invisible and pervasive. Whispers lingered in every corridor, like smoke twisting in sunlight, carrying fragments of rumor, suspicion, and hidden agendas. Today, you would learn a lesson far more delicate than punishment or protocol: the perilous art of discerning friend from foe. Lien approached, his expression unusually serious. "Trust here is a luxury," he said quietly. "You must choose allies carefully, and even then, only partially. A friend today may become a weapon tomorrow. And a smile can conceal a dagger just as easily as a dagger can conceal a smile. His eyes flicked toward a group of mid-ranking officials. Observe them. Learn to read the signs before you speak. In the main courtyard, officials were engaged in measured conversations. You noticed subtle cues, a slightly prolonged bow, a hand brushing against another's sleeve, a deliberate delay in answering a greeting. These were not casual gestures, they were the language of survival at King Zhou's court. Lien leaned close. Watch how they speak, how they listen, and what they leave unsaid. Absence and silence carry as much meaning as words themselves. A young scribe named Feng caught your eye. He smiled openly, extending a greeting as you passed. There was warmth in his tone, a rare display in these halls. You hesitated, remembering Lien's warning. Could this openness be genuine, or a calculated test? You responded cautiously, nodding politely, but withholding any personal information. Feng's eyes lingered, bright and seemingly sincere, yet your instincts told you to remain guarded. Later, in the archives, you overheard whispers about Feng, some praising his diligence, others hinting at ambition bordering on treachery. Conflicting reports made it impossible to ascertain his true intentions. Every official seemed a puzzle, a combination of motives, fears, and desires that could shift in an instant. Your mind raced to reconcile the outward behavior with the hidden currents beneath. During the afternoon session, you were paired with Feng to assist in reviewing scrolls for the king's edicts. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, and his demeanor remained composed. Yet even as he spoke, you noticed micro-expressions, slight tightening of his jaw, a flicker of hesitation in his gaze, that suggested careful calculation. Every phrase he uttered was measured. Was it caution, or cunning? Could he be gauging your reactions, testing your knowledge, or silently aligning himself with someone more powerful? By evening, a subtle test presented itself. A senior official, noticing your presence, asked a question laced with double meaning, an inquiry that could reveal loyalty or naivety. Feng's response was deft, providing an answer that appeared harmless while subtly signaling alignment with the powerful faction in the room. You realized then that survival required not just understanding the court, but also deciphering its hierarchies and reading the motives of those who appeared friendly. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the delicate balance of interaction. Trust was never absolute, it was a tool, a weapon, and a shield, used with precision or at perilous risk. Friends were not guaranteed, and even allies could become threats when the currents of power shifted. Your understanding deepened. In this court, intuition was as vital as obedience, and every relationship was a potential life or death calculation. That night, as the moonlight filtered through the lattices, you lay awake considering Feng's intentions, Lien's warnings, and your own observations. The line between friend and foe was razor thin, and one misjudgment could unravel everything. Shadows on the walls seemed to flicker with hidden meanings, each whisper of wind a reminder that the court never truly rested. You understood, more sharply than ever, that in this palace, survival depended not only on knowledge and caution but also on the delicate art of human perception. To trust, or to misjudge, was a gamble that could cost more than pride. And in the court of King Zhou, every gamble carried the shadow of death. The following day, the palace seemed alive with whispers of intrigue and careful observation. Every corridor, every staircase, every shadow hinted at hidden meanings. As you walked through the eastern wing, Lien motioned for you to follow him down a narrow, dimly lit hallway that you had not noticed before. Few know of this passage, he whispered. It can take us between chambers unseen. In this court, unseen movement can be just as important as measured speech. The passage was narrow, carved from stone, with faintly flickering lanterns casting shadows that danced along the walls. Each step echoed softly, a reminder that silence was a fragile ally. You realized that the palace itself had layers you had yet to understand, hidden routes, secret alcoves, and vantage points known only to those who survived long enough to uncover them. Lien led you to a small iron door, cleverly hidden behind a tapestry depicting a scene of imperial triumph. He pressed a hidden latch, and the door creaked open to reveal a spiral staircase descending into near darkness. The air grew cooler as you descended, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and centuries of secrecy. This passage, Lien explained, was used by officials to move discreetly during times of danger, or to overhear conversations that could decide careers or lives. As you emerged in a lower chamber, you noticed evidence of recent use: footprints, a half-burned candle, and a discarded piece of parchment. Every detail seemed intentional, as though someone had left them as clues, or warnings. You understood immediately that survival required more than obedience. It demanded curiosity tempered with caution, perception sharpened like a blade. Lien's voice was low. Knowledge of these routes can save your life, but misuse can also end it. Be vigilant. Watch, listen, and remember every detail. You nodded, acutely aware that the court was a living maze of opportunity and danger. Even a single misstep could alert unseen observers, or worse, reveal you to the wrong faction. Emerging back into the main corridors, you felt the full weight of the palace's atmosphere. Every face, every gesture, every word seemed magnified in significance. Officials passed with measured strides, their eyes flicking toward one another in subtle calculations. The court had a rhythm, and you were now beginning to recognize its tempo, a dangerous dance of observation and manipulation, where survival depended on timing as much as intelligence. Later that evening, as you returned to your quarters, you reviewed the route of the secret passage in your mind. It could serve as a means of escape, an opportunity to observe undetected, or a way to deliver messages without risk. Yet the very existence of such a passage underscored the constant danger. The court was built not only to display power but also to conceal it. The walls themselves were instruments of observation, of control, of silent judgment. As you lay on your thin mat, listening to the faint echoes of activity in the corridors above, a new understanding settled over you: knowledge was power, but only if wielded wisely. To move unseen, to listen without being caught, to act decisively in the shadow of danger, these were lessons no book or mentor could fully teach. You had to learn them through experience, through caution, and through careful attention to the subtle signals that the palace never failed to provide. The night pressed in with an almost tangible intensity, filled with whispers, shifting shadows, and the faint scrape of sandals on stone. The court of King Zhou was more than a place of hierarchy. It was a labyrinth, a test, and a trap. And now, you had discovered one of its hidden arteries, a secret through which survival, observation, and power could all flow, if you were cunning enough to use it wisely. The palace had long since fallen into a deceptive quiet. Moonlight filtered through latticed windows, casting silver patterns across polished floors, but the stillness was a lie. The corridors were alive with silent movements, whispers, and the subtle creak of shifting alliances. Tonight, you were about to witness the shadows of the court come alive in ways few novices ever saw. A soft knock at your door startled you. Lien slipped inside, his expression unusually grave. "You must come with me," he whispered. "There is a meeting, not sanctioned, not known by most. But it involves a conspiracy that could reshape loyalties at court. If you are to survive, you must see it, but tread carefully. Discovery could mean death." Following him, you retraced steps through the secret passage you had learned the day before. Its cool, narrow confines now felt like a lifeline. You moved silently, aware that any sound could betray your presence. At the end of the passage, a small wooden door opened into a shadowed chamber, dimly illuminated by a single lantern. Inside, a handful of mid-ranking officials huddled together, voices low but urgent. Their faces were tense, filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. One, a wiry man with a sharply angled face, spoke first. "The king grows suspicious of Minister Gao's influence. We cannot act openly, but if we do not maneuver carefully, we will be the next to fall." Another nodded, eyes glinting in the lamplight. "Agreed. We need a subtle shift, a message, a forged report, something that shifts the blame without implicating ourselves." You pressed yourself into the shadow, heart pounding. Each word was a lesson, each glance a study in fear and calculation. Lien's hand on your shoulder was firm, a reminder to stay silent, to observe. The conspirators debated with careful precision, weighing risk against potential gain. You realized that this court operated like a living chessboard, where moves were hidden, and pawns could be sacrificed without hesitation. As the discussion continued, subtle signals were exchanged, a flick of the wrist, a tap on a scroll, a whispered phrase. Each action was coded, understood only by those initiated into the plot. You noticed the layers of deception, one official feigning loyalty to Minister Gao, another pretending ignorance, while all prepared to act in a coordinated strike. It was a delicate dance of duplicity, and you were witnessing the choreography in real time. Suddenly, a distant sound, a guard's footsteps in the corridor above, made everyone tense. Heads turned, eyes darting toward the shadows. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, broken only by the barely audible hum of the lantern's flame. The conspirators remained calm, trained in the art of concealment, while you felt every nerve on edge, every instinct screaming caution. Finally, the meeting adjourned. Officials slipped away as quietly as they had arrived, leaving you alone with Lien. "Do you understand now?" he asked softly. "The court is never idle. Plots unfold constantly, and even the night is not safe from them. Observation is not enough, you must anticipate, read signals, and act only when you are certain of every outcome." Back in your quarters, the shadows of the night seemed heavier, the palace itself pressing down with invisible eyes. You reviewed every detail in your mind, gestures, whispers, glances, pauses. Each carried meaning, and each could mean life, or death. As you lay down to rest, sleep was uneasy. Your dreams were filled with shadows moving through corridors, secret hands exchanging messages, and the faint, chilling laughter of those who had learned the rules of survival far more effectively than you. The lesson of the midnight conspiracy was clear: the court of King Zhou did not sleep, and neither could your awareness. Every moment was a test, every silence a message, and every shadow a potential threat. The next day dawned with a sense of foreboding. Even the morning sun seemed hesitant to enter the palace courtyards, its golden light muted by the weight of anticipation. Whispers had begun to circulate, a punishment was to be carried out today, and all officials were expected to witness it in some capacity. The court of King Zhou thrived on fear as much as it did on order, and punishment was a lesson delivered publicly, leaving no room for doubt. You followed Lien through the winding corridors, arriving at the southern wing, where the punishment chamber lay hidden behind thick doors of dark wood. The hallways leading to it were strangely silent, as though the palace itself held its breath. Servants and guards moved with careful precision, their faces masks of obedience, hiding the anxiety that flickered in their eyes. The chamber itself was austere, a stark contrast to the opulence of the banquet halls. Stone walls absorbed every sound, echoing faintly the soft shuffle of feet and the whispers of officials. In the center of the room stood a raised platform, polished to a cold gleam. Chains and instruments of punishment were neatly arranged, gleaming under the pale light from narrow windows. The air smelled faintly of iron and dust, a grim reminder of the chamber's purpose. A young clerk, already trembling, was brought before the platform. He had been accused of misfiling documents, a minor error that, in any other context, might have been forgiven. But here, the court demanded precision and loyalty above all, and mistakes carried consequences far beyond comprehension. The guards forced him to kneel, and silence fell across the chamber like a heavy shroud. You watched as a minister read aloud the charges. The clerk's head bowed low, eyes wide with fear, yet there was a subtle dignity in the way he held himself. Each word of the decree reverberated in your chest, even trivial mistakes could lead to humiliation, pain, and imprisonment. The lesson was as brutal as it was clear: obedience was mandatory, but survival required understanding far more than rules alone. The punishment was swift and calculated. The clerk was flogged, each strike a reminder to all present that the court's power was absolute. The sounds echoed off the stone walls, mingling with gasps and the soft shuffle of officials trying to maintain composure. You noticed micro-expressions among the gathered ministers, some satisfied, some uneasy, others calculating how this event might shift alliances or signal favor. Every gesture carried meaning, every reaction was noted. When the punishment ended, the clerk was dragged away to the prison chambers below, leaving a silence that weighed heavily on the witnesses. Lien's hand rested briefly on your shoulder, a quiet reminder: never forget the consequences of carelessness. The court was a living organism, and punishment was one of its most potent tools, shaping behavior through fear, obedience, and constant vigilance. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the lessons of the day. Survival at King Zhou's court was not about strength alone, nor knowledge alone. It was about perception, timing, and the ability to anticipate danger before it struck. Even a minor slip, a delayed gesture, a misinterpreted glance, could place you in the path of punishment. That night, the walls of the palace seemed to whisper reminders of what you had witnessed. Shadows twisted as if alive, carrying messages of caution and vigilance. Sleep was uneasy, filled with visions of the punishment chamber, of the clerk's fearful eyes, and the silent calculations of those who wielded power. You understood with a chilling clarity that every day at court was a lesson, every corridor a potential trap, and every interaction a test of survival. In the court of King Zhou, mercy was rare, and punishment was inevitable. And now, you had seen firsthand how swiftly life could shift from security to peril. The morning sun crept hesitantly into the palace, painting the courtyards in soft gold, yet the warmth did little to ease the tension that lingered from the previous day's punishment. Even the servants moved with heightened caution, whispering among themselves in hushed tones that carried more information than they realized. It was said that the palace maids knew more than the ministers themselves. Every secret, every slip, every rumor passed through their delicate fingers before it reached the higher echelons. Lien approached you with a careful look. "Listen," he whispered, "the maids see all. Every time an official leaves a chamber, every secret message hidden in scrolls, every gesture of fear or ambition, they notice. But approach them incorrectly, and you'll be seen as a threat or a fool. Their whispers are weapons in the wrong hands, yet tools in the right ones." You walked through the western wing, where the maids moved swiftly between corridors and chambers. Their eyes, bright and watchful, flicked toward every passerby, noting movement and demeanor. Occasionally, a fleeting glance, a curl of a lip, a tilt of the head conveyed messages far subtler than words. You began to recognize patterns. Certain gestures indicated loyalty, others, fear, some expressed knowledge, others caution. Even the way they carried trays, folded linens, or arranged ornaments carried meaning in this delicate, unseen language. Later, while reviewing scrolls in a quiet corner of the archives, you overheard two maids speaking in whispers so soft you almost missed them. "Did you see Minister Gao's new decree?" one asked. "It will ruin half the juniors if he gains favor. The king has no patience for errors." Her companion nodded, glancing nervously toward the hall. "And the young scribe yesterday? A lesson to all. I heard whispers that even Minister Zhao hesitated to intervene. He fears losing influence if he acts too soon." Every word carried significance. You realized that palace maids, often dismissed as mere servants, were the silent recorders of the court. They memorized behaviors, noted alliances, observed slips, and passed information up and down the hierarchy with precision. What they whispered could alter fates, manipulate perceptions, or trigger punishments. Their seemingly mundane chatter was an undercurrent of power. That evening, Lien guided you to a vantage point overlooking the maids' quarters. From there, you could observe patterns: who moved quickly, who lingered, who shared private looks and gestures. You began to understand how these small movements influenced the court. Even a minor expression of frustration, a delayed gesture, or an unintended glance could ripple outward, changing how officials perceived one another. You remembered the clerk punished in the chamber yesterday. How easily could a maid's observation, a note whispered to a minister, have hastened his downfall? Every step through the palace now carried weight, every interaction had layers you had yet to fully understand. Survival required attention to details invisible to the untrained eye. As you returned to your quarters, the palace seemed to hum with hidden activity. Even at night, shadows shifted, carrying secrets and whispers from one corner to the next. You lay on your thin mat, contemplating the subtle but immense power of those often overlooked. Trust was not given lightly here, and knowledge was the currency of survival. In King Zhou's court, the quietest voices could wield the greatest influence. And now, more than ever, you understood that perception, observation, and discretion were as vital as loyalty, skill, or courage. To navigate this world, you would need to see what others overlooked, and learn to act in silence. The following morning, a folded piece of parchment arrived at your quarters, delivered by a quiet servant who disappeared before you could speak. The seal was unremarkable at first glance, but a closer inspection revealed the faint imprint of a minister's insignia, an unmistakable sign that the message carried weight far beyond ordinary correspondence. You hesitated, understanding the danger of reading what might be intended for someone else, yet curiosity and necessity compelled you to open it. The letter was brief but charged with implication. It hinted at shifting alliances among the ministers, subtle threats to officials who had shown either ambition or weakness, and a clandestine plan that would be enacted under the cover of evening. The words were chosen carefully, deliberately ambiguous, and the meaning depended on knowledge of the palace's intricate web of relationships. Reading it, you felt a thrill of fear and understanding. The court operated as a living organism, and every written message was a nerve connecting its many parts. Lien appeared suddenly, as if summoned by your thoughts. "Do you see now?" he whispered, his eyes scanning the parchment before you could speak. "A single letter can determine survival or doom. It is not merely ink on paper, it is a weapon. You must learn to interpret it, and more importantly, to decide how, when, or if to act upon it." You studied the text, noting the subtle cues, the choice of words, the spacing of lines, the ink's slight variation in darkness. Every detail suggested urgency, hidden threat, and delicate manipulation. One misinterpretation could reveal you as naive, one hesitation could mark you for scrutiny. And yet, understanding it offered an opportunity to gain insight, to anticipate moves before they unfolded, and perhaps to influence outcomes subtly without drawing attention. The afternoon passed in careful analysis. You traced connections between the ministers mentioned, considering their known alliances, recent behavior, and subtle gestures you had observed. Slowly, the puzzle began to take shape. The letter was more than a warning, it was a map of influence, of power shifting beneath the polished surfaces of the court. And you realized, with a cold thrill, that understanding it could provide a form of protection, foresight. Yet the risk was palpable. A letter intercepted or misread could ruin you. The court had no patience for error, and knowledge could be just as dangerous as ignorance. Lien reminded you of the stakes: every letter, every whisper, every glance carries consequence. Use them wisely, or you will be swept away by currents you cannot see. Evening arrived, bringing the faint glow of lanterns and shadows stretching long across the corridors. The letter, carefully folded, lay in front of you, a silent companion in a palace where trust was scarce and every act carried weight. You understood that your survival depended not just on learning, but on anticipating the motives, desires, and fears of those around you, and perhaps acting before they realized you had understood. As you lay on your mat that night, the letter tucked safely nearby, sleep was uneasy. You imagined the ministers plotting under the same moonlight, unaware that their designs were being observed. You thought of the punishment chamber, the whispers of the maids, and the subtle glances in the banquet halls. Every moment at King Zhou's court was a test, and tonight, you realized that knowledge, discretion, and timing were as vital as courage itself. The palace exhaled around you, alive with secrets, plotting, and danger. And the letter reminded you, to survive here, one must not only act but also see the invisible threads connecting every word, every gesture, and every shadow. The next day, the palace felt heavier, almost oppressive, as if the walls themselves were aware of the currents of power shifting within. Whispers carried more urgency, glances lingered longer, and subtle signs hinted at alliances forming in secret. Lien led you along a quieter corridor, one you had not traversed before, and paused near a small wooden door hidden behind a tapestry. This, he said softly, is where you will begin to understand the hidden faction. Not all influence is visible. Some ministers operate entirely in shadows, their decisions made through secret channels, their power invisible to those who rely only on appearance. The door creaked open, revealing a dim chamber where a handful of officials gathered. Their voices were low but deliberate, each word chosen to avoid detection by the uninitiated. Maps, scrolls, and diagrams were spread across a table, outlining intricate plans, alliances, and manipulations. It was clear that this faction existed to shift the balance of power subtly, guiding decisions in ways that could benefit or destroy any who were not aware of their presence. You recognized several officials you had observed in the main hall. Alone, they seemed ordinary, polished, careful, diligent. Yet here, removed from prying eyes, they revealed another side, calculating, patient, ruthless when necessary. The contrast was startling. You realized that survival required not only understanding what was visible but also deciphering the invisible threads that shaped the court's true dynamics. One official pointed to a scroll, indicating a subtle misstep by a higher-ranking minister. If this goes unnoticed, he said, we can shift influence without drawing attention. Timing is everything. A careless observer might never detect the maneuver, but its impact will be profound. Others nodded, discussing quietly how minor actions could cascade into major outcomes. Every gesture, every whisper, every misinterpreted word could be weaponized or deflected. Lien's voice was quiet in your ear. Notice how they operate. Patience, discretion, and subtlety are their weapons. They do not rely on open confrontation, they act in ways that shape perception, manipulate fear, and exploit ambition. To survive, you must learn their methods, or at least recognize them before they affect you. You spent hours observing, taking note of interactions, glances, and unspoken cues. Even the way a hand rested on a scroll, or the manner in which a phrase was repeated, held significance. You began to understand that the visible hierarchy of the court, the ministers, the attendants, the king himself, was only one layer. Beneath it existed a shadow network, where influence was wielded quietly, invisibly, but no less effectively. By evening, you had pieced together a tentative understanding of the faction's goals, subtle manipulation of appointments, careful control of information, and the orchestration of events to maintain or expand power while remaining unseen. The lesson was clear, knowing about the hidden faction could be a shield, but misreading its intentions could make you vulnerable to their machinations. As you returned to your quarters, the corridors seemed alive with possibility and peril. Shadows were no longer just darkness, they were conduits of influence, messages, and secrets. You lay awake that night, reviewing every gesture, every whispered conversation, every subtle signal you had witnessed. The palace was a living chessboard, and the hidden faction moved pieces few others even realized existed. Understanding them was no longer optional. To survive at King Zhou's court, you would need to anticipate the unseen, navigate without error, and recognize the invisible strings that guided the ambitions of those who wielded power quietly but effectively. And failure to do so could mean more than humiliation, it could mean death. That night, the palace seemed to hold its breath. The usual clamor of footsteps and whispers was muted, replaced by an eerie stillness. Shadows stretched long along corridors and staircases, as though the walls themselves were watching. Tonight, you were to accompany Lien on the night patrol, a rare privilege and a lesson in observing the court's hidden movements after dark. Lien moved silently, guiding you through the narrow passageways and courtyards. Most officials sleep, he whispered, but the night is when the court is most honest. Guards, maids, and even some ministers reveal their true intentions when they think no one is watching. Watch, and you will learn more tonight than in a month of daylight lessons. As you passed through the eastern courtyard, you noticed shadows moving in ways that were subtly unusual. A servant hesitated at a doorway, glancing around as though expecting someone. A guard shifted his weight repeatedly, his eyes scanning the walls and corners. Every slight movement had significance, and you felt the full weight of your inexperience. One misstep, one misread gesture, could expose you, or worse. In a secluded corridor, you observed two officials exchanging what appeared to be ordinary scrolls. Yet their gestures were deliberate, practiced, and careful. Lien nudged you slightly. Do you see? The court's secrets move constantly, hidden in plain sight. Messages, instructions, threats, they are never sent openly. Only the careful, the observant, survive to act upon them. The patrol continued past the northern wing, where faint voices carried from hidden chambers. Officials spoke in low tones, but the meaning was clear through their posture, the speed of their speech, and the subtle glances at those nearby. One phrase, almost lost to casual hearing, revealed shifting alliances, a nod here, a hesitation there, suggested emerging rivalries. You scribbled notes mentally, aware that every observation was a clue in the palace's constant game of influence. Suddenly, a faint rustle from a shadowed doorway drew your attention. A young page, clearly attempting to move unnoticed, froze as a guard approached. Lien's hand pressed lightly against your shoulder. "Watch quietly," he murmured. "Even mistakes can teach you lessons." The guard's scrutiny passed, and the page moved on, unseen. Yet the encounter spoke volumes about vigilance, fear, and the hidden stakes of every movement in the palace. By the time the patrol concluded, you had observed a dozen subtle interactions, each a fragment of the court's hidden rhythms. Guards patrolled with unspoken codes, servants whispered messages to the right ears, and ministers maneuvered even in the cover of night. The palace was a living organism, every shadow, every step, every glance a vital part of its operation. Returning to your quarters, you felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The night had revealed the delicate, dangerous choreography of life in the court. Lien's lessons were clear: awareness, patience, and careful observation were as crucial as obedience. Even the smallest detail could provide leverage, or seal your doom. As you lay on your thin mat, the moonlight casting faint patterns on the walls, you reviewed the night's events. The palace was no longer merely a place of punishment, feasts, and whispered rumors. It was a constant battlefield, invisible yet omnipresent, where perception, timing, and subtlety determined survival. You understood, with growing certainty, that every day, every night, would test your awareness, your judgment, and your ability to navigate the lethal currents of King Zhou's court. The shadows moved, and in them, the court's secrets waited. And you had begun to see. The following morning, the palace corridors felt charged with subtle energy. Ministers moved with deliberate steps, officials whispered cautiously, and even the sunlight streaming through latticed windows seemed to cast shadows that hinted at hidden meanings. Today, you were summoned to Minister Wei's private study, an unusual honor for someone so new, and you sensed immediately that it was more than a routine meeting. "Come in," Wei said, his tone calm yet edged with authority. "You have observed much, and your awareness has been noted. But awareness alone is not enough. Survival here requires alliances, however delicate, and understanding how to navigate favor without provoking jealousy or suspicion." You bowed, feeling the weight of his gaze. Wei motioned toward a seat near a low table, where scrolls were laid out meticulously. "I have observed your discretion during the recent events, the punishment of the clerk, the whispers of the maids, even the movements during the night patrol. Your attentiveness has not gone unnoticed." The compliment, though subtle, was layered with meaning. In this court, praise was rarely given freely, it carried expectation, obligation, and sometimes the shadow of manipulation. Wei's eyes searched yours, measuring not just your response but the intentions behind it. You realized that receiving favor was as dangerous as it was beneficial. "Consider this," he continued, pointing to a folded parchment. "A small opportunity has arisen. An official's position is precarious, and a well-timed intervention, carefully executed, could shift influence significantly. Those who act wisely will be remembered. Those who act poorly will vanish into obscurity, or worse." You understood the implicit lesson: favor was a double-edged sword. Acting with courage, or cunning, could elevate your standing, but a single misstep could make you a target for punishment, accusation, or political maneuvering. The palace was a chessboard, and Wei was offering you a piece to move, with unseen consequences depending on how you played. The minister's tone softened slightly, but the underlying tension remained. Observe closely. Speak little. And act with precision. You are now entrusted with information that could be used to protect or destroy. Misjudgment here could be fatal. As you left the study, the corridors seemed alive with possibility. Every glance, every whispered comment, every gesture could be interpreted in multiple ways. Favor, you realized, was not simply a reward, it was a responsibility, a test, and potentially a trap. You would need to weigh every action carefully, anticipating both immediate consequences and long-term ramifications. That afternoon, as you reviewed the information Wei had shared, you noticed how subtly it could be applied. Timing was everything. A comment, a gesture, or a carefully placed message could alter alliances, shift attention, or manipulate outcomes without anyone suspecting your involvement. Yet the risk was constant. The court's web of observation meant that one careless act could undo all progress. By evening, the corridors seemed to pulse with hidden activity, as if the palace itself were aware that a new element, your presence, had been introduced into its intricate web. Shadows lengthened, whispers multiplied, and the unseen mechanisms of power continued their relentless, silent motion. As you lay on your mat that night, reflecting on Minister Wei's words, you understood that survival was now more than observation and caution. It required judgment, subtlety, and the courage to act within a world where even favor could carry the weight of potential doom. The court of King Zhou was teaching you, relentlessly, that every advantage came with risk, and every decision, no matter how small, was a step in the delicate, dangerous dance of power. And tomorrow, you knew, would bring another test. The morning air in the palace carried an unusual tension. Servants hurried silently, ministers exchanged subtle glances, and the scent of incense seemed heavier than usual, as though the palace itself anticipated what was about to unfold. Today, you were invited, secretly, to a meeting that was technically forbidden, yet whispered about among the more daring officials. Lien's expression was grave as he guided you through the eastern wing. This meeting, he whispered, involves decisions that even the king may not be fully aware of. Attending it is dangerous, being discovered could mean imprisonment, or worse. But what is learned here can alter the balance of survival in this court. Watch, listen, and judge carefully. The chamber was small, hidden behind a tapestry depicting a ceremonial procession. Only a handful of officials were present, seated around a low, polished table. The atmosphere was tense, the weight of secrecy palpable. Every movement, every glance carried significance. You realized instantly that these officials were masters of discretion, their power exercised quietly yet decisively. One of the senior members spoke first, voice low but deliberate. The king's attention is elsewhere. Now is the moment to correct missteps that have weakened our positions. If we act with precision, the shifts will appear natural, unavoidable. But hesitation, or detection, would destroy us. A younger minister added, "We have the letters, the observations from the maids, and the patterns of alliances. Everything is mapped. Every whisper has been noted. Tonight, we act through subtle influence, ensuring our objectives are achieved without alerting others." You observed every gesture, the subtle nods, the tap of a finger on a scroll, the way eyes shifted to avoid meeting one another directly. This was a choreography of power, executed flawlessly by those who had survived the court's trials for years. Even a slight misstep could have fatal consequences. Lien's hand rested lightly on your shoulder, a reminder to remain silent and attentive. You noticed your heart pounding, each beat echoing the tension in the room. Here, every word carried weight, every pause was calculated, and even silence could speak volumes. The discussion continued, outlining the steps each official would take to influence decisions, control information, and subtly shift favor among the ministers. You realized that this was a game of invisible chess, where pieces were moved not by force but by manipulation, observation, and timing. When the meeting concluded, the officials departed silently, leaving you alone with Lien. You have seen how decisions are influenced in ways the untrained eye cannot detect, he whispered. What you have witnessed tonight is a lesson in subtlety and discretion. Survival in this court depends on seeing beyond appearances and acting with precision when the moment arises. As you retraced your steps through the secret passage back to your quarters, the palace felt different, more alive, more dangerous. Shadows seemed to move with intent, whispers lingered in corners, and every door, corridor, and window held the possibility of observation or revelation. That night, as you lay on your thin mat, you reflected on the forbidden meeting. You realized that knowledge alone was not enough, understanding when and how to act was equally vital. Every interaction, every observation, every node of information could be used to protect yourself, or to destroy you. The court of King Zhou was an intricate maze of power, deception, and subtle manipulation. And tonight, you had glimpsed the depths of its shadows. Tomorrow, you would need to navigate them with even greater care. The morning of the following day arrived quietly, but attention hung heavier than ever. Even the guards seemed more vigilant, their eyes flicking to corridors and doorways with subtle suspicion. Today, you were summoned to the inner hall for a private audience with Minister Zhou, known for his opulent feasts and meticulous scrutiny of all who approached him. Though the invitation appeared as a courtesy, you sensed immediately that the stakes were far higher. The hall was lavish, with sunlight glinting off gilded decorations and fine porcelain. Tables were set with exquisite dishes, delicate wines, and ceremonial cups that shimmered like jewels. Yet beneath the splendor lay an unmistakable tension. Every guest's posture, every hand movement, every glance could reveal hidden intentions. The court had taught you to notice these signs, and today they were more critical than ever. Zhao greeted you with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I am pleased to see you again," he said smoothly. "Come, sit. Observe, taste, and speak cautiously. The court has a long memory, and even the smallest gesture may be remembered." You bowed, noting the subtle scrutiny in his gaze. You were aware that every action, however minor, could be interpreted as loyalty, ambition, or folly. As the meal progressed, conversation flowed carefully, measured, and full of subtext. Zhao spoke of alliances, favor, and the shifting moods of the king. You noticed how the ministers subtly signaled one another through a glance, a tap of a finger on a dish, or the way a cup was lifted. Every movement had meaning. Every pause could conceal threat, or opportunity. Then came the cup of wine, handed to you with a practiced flourish. Its surface shimmered in the light, almost inviting trust. Lien's warning echoed in your mind, even favors may carry peril. Always watch for subtle signs. Not everything offered is safe. Your hand hovered, measuring the implications. Zhao's smile remained, but there was a fleeting flicker in his eyes, a hint, perhaps, that the offering was not mere courtesy. You remembered the clerk, the maid's whispers, the midnight conspiracies, and the secret passages. Survival at King Zhou's court depended on perceiving danger before it struck. Slowly, deliberately, you set the cup aside, offering a polite gesture of deference without consuming the contents. Zhao's eyes narrowed subtly, yet he did not press the issue. The message was clear: rejection, handled correctly, could convey prudence. Mishandled, it could incite suspicion. The rest of the meal continued with careful observation. You noted who nodded at Zhao, who avoided eye contact, who subtly shifted their position at the table. The court's language was subtle yet precise, and every gesture was a test, a declaration, or a probe. You realized how finely balanced survival had become, a single misinterpretation could unravel everything. When the audience ended, you retraced your steps through the palace corridors, your mind alert to every sound, every shadow, every subtle shift in the rhythm of the court. Lien followed silently, his eyes reflecting understanding and approval. Today, you have learned that even the simplest gestures, a cup, a smile, a pause, may hide lethal consequences. In this court, awareness is not enough, judgment and timing determine survival. That night, sleep came fitfully. You imagined the cup's shimmering surface, the subtle flicker of Zhao's eyes, and the invisible threads of danger woven into every interaction. The palace itself seemed alive, every shadow a potential threat, every whisper a message. Survival required vigilance, subtlety, and courage. One misstep could be fatal. In King Zhou's court, even the most innocent of actions carried the weight of life or death. And tonight, you had glimpsed the peril concealed within the most ordinary gesture, a lesson you would never forget. The morning after the tense encounter with Minister Zhao, the palace seemed unusually quiet. Even the bustling corridors of servants and officials were subdued, as though the court itself was holding its breath. As you moved through the eastern wing, a small folded slip of paper was discreetly placed in your hand by a young page, his eyes darting nervously around before he disappeared into the shadows. The paper was unassuming, yet you sensed immediately that it carried weight. Carefully unfolding it, you discovered a brief, coded message. It referenced a meeting of mid-ranking ministers, hinting at discussions of influence, alliances, and potential betrayal. The language was cryptic, but familiar to your growing understanding of the court's subtle codes. A word here suggested urgency, a phrase there indicated danger, and even the spacing of the text hinted at concealed meanings. Lien appeared beside you silently, reading over your shoulder with a grave expression. A message like this, he whispered, is both an opportunity and a risk. It allows you to act, observe, and understand, but one misinterpretation can expose you. Remember, in this court, information is more deadly than any sword. You memorized the details carefully, noting each word and its placement, while weighing the potential implications. The hidden message suggested that certain ministers were dissatisfied with Minister Zhao's recent actions and were planning subtle maneuvers to shift power in their favor. Acting on this knowledge could provide leverage, or invite danger if discovered. By midday, you followed the pattern suggested by the message, observing ministers as they moved through the hallways. You noticed small gestures, quick glances, the angle of a bowed head, the speed of a footstep, that confirmed the hidden currents described in the note. Even casual conversations held hints, phrases repeated, delayed responses, and tiny pauses revealed intentions that were otherwise invisible. Lien guided you through the subtle web of observation. Notice who reacts to whom, and how. A frown, a nod, a shift in posture, these are the signs that indicate alignment, suspicion, or concealment. The message has given us a clue, but survival depends on reading it correctly, not just knowing it exists. Later, in the shadowed corridors, you witnessed a minister hand a folded scroll to a colleague with barely a whisper. The timing and discretion of the exchange suggested premeditated coordination. The message you received earlier had prepared you to see it, not as a casual interaction, but as a deliberate act shaping the invisible balance of the court. By evening, you reflected on the day's observations. The hidden message had revealed layers of intrigue, yet also demonstrated the risks inherent in knowing too much. Every interaction was a test, misinterpretation could end in humiliation or death, while careful understanding offered a rare chance to navigate the court with greater insight. As night fell, you lay on your mat, thinking of the young page who had delivered the message, of Lien's careful guidance, and of the ministers moving like shadows through the corridors. Each secret, each whisper, each coded gesture was a thread in the web of survival at King Zhou's court. You understood, more keenly than ever, that information was power, but wielding it required patience, perception, and perfect timing. The palace was alive with hidden currents, and tonight, you had glimpsed one of them. But in a place where the smallest slip could bring death, even knowledge could be a dangerous gift. The next day began quietly, yet you sensed an unusual tension in the air. Servants moved with extra caution, and even the ministers seemed to carry themselves more deliberately, as if aware that something unexpected was about to disrupt the palace's delicate balance. As you walked through the eastern wing, Lien motioned for you to follow him to a side corridor rarely used by officials. "There is a visitor today," he whispered, his eyes scanning the hall for anyone observing. "Unexpected guests are always dangerous. They bring news, influence, or threats that can shift the balance of power. Even a seemingly harmless visitor can expose weaknesses or create opportunities for manipulation." The visitor appeared at the main hall, escorted with minimal fanfare. A tall figure cloaked in muted colors, his expression unreadable, entered quietly. Officials murmured behind their hands, exchanging subtle glances. It was clear that the presence of this individual had created ripples across the court, and every reaction, from nervous smiles to hesitant bows, was laden with meaning. You observed carefully as the visitor approached Minister Wei. A quiet conversation ensued, words barely audible but gestures sharp and deliberate. The subtle bow of the visitor, the slight nod from Wei, and the lingering glance between the two conveyed layers of unspoken understanding. You realized immediately that the visitor was not merely a messenger, but someone who wielded influence behind the scenes, a presence capable of altering loyalties and shaping decisions. Lien whispered, "Watch their movements. Notice who observes them, who approaches, who steps aside. Every action communicates something, whether intended or not. The court is a living organism, and even a single stranger can create chaos or opportunity depending on how it is perceived." As the morning progressed, the visitor moved through various chambers, each interaction carefully measured. A minister lowered his eyes slightly when approached, another shifted position, indicating submission or awareness of hierarchy. Even the subtle exchange of a scroll, barely noticed by anyone else, carried significance. The palace, you realized, was not just a place of politics, it was a theater of calculated influence, and the visitor was now a key actor. During a brief pause in the audience, you caught sight of the visitor glancing toward you and Lien. Though the moment lasted barely a heartbeat, the intent behind the gaze was unmistakable, a test, a measurement of your awareness and discretion. Lien's grip on your shoulder tightened subtly, a reminder to remain unseen yet alert. Even the youngest presence in the palace could be noted, assessed, and judged by those who understood its hidden dynamics. By evening, the visitor had departed as quietly as he had arrived, leaving a trace of tension and speculation behind. Officials whispered, shifted alliances were recalculated, and subtle favors were reconsidered. The ripples of a single unexpected arrival had cascaded across the court, reshaping priorities and revealing vulnerabilities. As you returned to your quarters, you reflected on the day's events. The visitor had demonstrated how fragile the balance of power could be, and how even a single, unforeseen presence could expose or protect lives. Knowledge, observation, and discretion had once again proven essential for survival. That night, shadows seemed to move with purpose through the palace corridors. Every whisper, every glance, every step carried hidden meaning. And you understood, more clearly than ever, that survival at King Zhou's court depended not only on vigilance but also on the ability to perceive and adapt to the unexpected. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyards, but the brightness did little to dispel the tension that lingered from the visitor's arrival. Whispers of speculation filled the halls, subtle glances exchanged between ministers, and the quiet shuffling of servants hinted at an undercurrent of unease. Today, you would witness the fragile nature of alliances, how quickly they could shift, and how survival depended on reading these changes before they became dangerous. Lien guided you through the western corridors, where officials were meeting in small, secluded clusters. "Notice their posture," he whispered. "Alliances at this court are rarely permanent. Trust is a currency, but it is always borrowed and often recalled. A smile today may conceal a dagger tomorrow, and a whispered compliment may carry a threat." You observed two ministers who had recently been allies, discussing a report with measured attention. Their conversation seemed polite, yet micro-expressions betrayed hesitation and suspicion. One hesitated before offering a phrase, while the other's hand brushed the edge of a scroll as if testing the strength of a hidden argument. Every movement was calculated, a silent negotiation of loyalty and ambition. Later, during a council session, the fractured alliance became more apparent. Subtle gestures, a delayed nod, a slight turn of the body, the brief exchange of a glance, revealed growing distrust. You realized that even minor signs, easily overlooked by the untrained, carried enormous significance in this court. The officials were not only debating policy, they were carefully testing one another, probing for weaknesses, and seeking opportunities to assert influence. Lien leaned close. Observe who benefits from this tension, he murmured. In fractured alliances, power shifts rapidly. Those who are patient and perceptive gain the most, while those who act hastily risk everything. Survival depends on knowing when to act and when to remain invisible. Throughout the day, you traced the subtle movements of key players, noting how whispers and gestures spread like invisible threads across the court. Even those who appeared uninvolved were part of the larger network, their loyalty shifting silently as the fractured alliance evolved. A single misstep, a misplaced word, a hesitant bow, or an ill-timed glance, could destabilize your own standing or invite the wrath of a powerful faction. By evening, the fracture was clear. Two ministers who had once coordinated openly now acted with cautious distance, while a third maneuvered subtly to position himself as an intermediary, gaining leverage over both. You understood that alliances here were dynamic, fragile, and often weaponized. Observing these shifts, rather than participating, allowed you to remain safe while gaining critical insight into the inner workings of the court. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the lessons of the day. Power at King Zhou's court was never static, it flowed and ebbed like water, and those who survived were those who understood its currents. Alliances could be a shield or a trap, and trust was always provisional. Every gesture, every whispered conversation, and every decision carried consequences far beyond immediate perception. That night, the palace seemed alive with silent recalculations. Shadows moved with intent, and whispers carried the weight of hidden strategies. You lay on your thin mat, replaying the day's observations in your mind, understanding more deeply than ever that survival required perception, patience, and the ability to navigate the shifting alliances that determined life, or death, at King Zhou's court. The morning air carried a sense of tension that felt almost tangible. Even the courtyard seemed quieter, the usual bustle of servants and officials subdued, as though the palace itself knew that a trap was set, invisible but deadly. Lien guided you through a less-traveled corridor, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. Today, he whispered, you will see that even the most careful observation is not enough. The court thrives on hidden traps, some laid for the unsuspecting, others for those too cautious to act. Your steps echoed softly against the polished stone floor as you approached a secluded chamber rarely used by officials. Lien gestured for you to pause. Watch the room first, he said. Notice details that seem out of place. The court leaves breadcrumbs, some for guidance, others for destruction. Inside the chamber, a few mid-ranking officials were gathered, apparently in discussion about a minor administrative issue. Yet subtle signs betrayed that all was not as it seemed. A misplaced scroll, a candle burning slightly lower than the rest, and a careful positioning of chairs suggested premeditation. Every detail, seemingly mundane, was a thread in a trap designed to ensnare the inattentive or overconfident. One official moved deliberately, guiding a colleague to a specific spot. A whispered instruction, barely audible, directed attention to a document that contained a subtle error. You realized immediately that the error was intended to provoke scrutiny, creating an opening for accusation. Someone watching too closely, or too eagerly, could be caught in the web. Lien's voice was quiet but firm. See how the trap is constructed. It is not violence that kills here, it is the careful orchestration of perception, the subtle manipulation of attention. Even an innocent observer can be ensnared if they fail to understand the design. You remained still, noting each movement, each glance, and each whispered instruction. The officials executed their roles flawlessly, unaware, or perhaps indifferent, to the presence of observers. The chamber was a theater of control, where the slightest misstep could have catastrophic consequences. You understood that survival depended on recognizing the invisible architecture of danger before becoming part of it. Minutes stretched into an hour as you traced every detail, mapping the positions, gestures, and words in your mind. The chamber's design revealed a larger truth about the palace: traps were everywhere, hidden beneath layers of ordinary activity, and even vigilance could be weaponized against the unwary. A single misinterpretation, a hesitant gesture, or a delayed observation could expose you to accusation or worse. As the officials departed, leaving the chamber empty, you felt the weight of the lesson. The trap was not meant to be triggered by them, it was a demonstration, a subtle warning for those who observed too boldly or interpreted too eagerly. You realized that in King Zhou's court, caution was not merely advised, it was essential. Returning to your quarters, you replayed every detail in your mind. Shadows that had seemed innocuous now appeared as potential threats, casual gestures revealed hidden intent, the simplest misstep could alter your standing or seal your fate. The palace was alive with unseen snares, and the day's lesson reinforced the delicate balance between awareness and survival. That night, sleep was uneasy. Every shadow in your quarters seemed to shift with hidden purpose, every whisper in the corridors carried the weight of potential peril. You understood, more profoundly than ever, that survival required not just observation, but interpretation, discretion, and the ability to navigate the palace's intricate, invisible traps. In King Zhou's court, even caution could be ensnared. And now, you knew just how carefully one had to move to survive. The day began quietly, but the stillness belied a latent tension that hung over the palace corridors. Every official, every servant, every guard moved with a careful precision, aware that even minor missteps could be observed and later twisted into accusations. Today, Lien explained, you would witness the art of subtle threats, how the court used influence, insinuation, and intimidation to control without openly punishing. You will notice, Lien whispered as you followed him through the eastern halls, that most threats here are invisible. No one raises a hand, no one shouts. Yet fear spreads like wildfire. A carefully timed glance, a delayed bow, or even a casual comment can carry consequences more potent than a sword. You observed a group of mid-ranking officials gathered near Minister Zhao's office. They appeared to be engaged in casual discussion, yet every gesture seemed weighted with intent. A hand resting too long on a scroll, a slightly raised eyebrow, a pause before responding, all communicated information about power, loyalty, and possible disfavor. Lien guided your attention to subtle exchanges, a whisper in the hallway, barely audible, a bow held longer than necessary, the deliberate arrangement of papers on a desk. These are the signals of threat, he explained. They are subtle, almost invisible to the inattentive, yet their effect is immediate. Fear is planted, doubt is sown, and the target is forced to act cautiously, sometimes to the point of paralysis. Later, during a council meeting, the subtle threat became more apparent. A junior minister, recently promoted, hesitated before answering a question. The senior minister across from him offered a quiet correction, a phrase delivered with a tone that seemed innocent, yet carried unmistakable weight. The room remained outwardly composed, but the junior minister's reaction revealed the silent pressure exerted on him, a tense posture, a downward glance, and an almost imperceptible tightening of the jaw. You realized that survival in this court required constant vigilance. Not only did you have to observe overt actions, but you also had to interpret what was unsaid. The slightest misread of intention could invite danger, while accurate perception could provide protection or leverage. Every encounter, every pause, every gesture was a test of understanding and adaptability. By evening, you retraced the day's interactions in your mind. You identified patterns of influence, subtle forms of intimidation, and hidden lines of loyalty. You noted how whispers traveled through the palace like invisible currents, altering perceptions and shaping decisions without any official decree. The subtle threat was a weapon of precision, invisible, almost undetectable, but lethal in its psychological effect. As you lay on your mat that night, the lessons of the day weighed heavily on your thoughts. The palace itself seemed alive with invisible pressure, every shadow a reminder of observation, every whisper a potential warning. You understood that survival required more than knowledge of events, it required perception, discernment, and the ability to anticipate threats before they were ever explicitly stated. In King Zhou's court, danger was rarely blatant. It hid in gestures, in words left unsaid, and in the careful choreography of power. And tonight, you had glimpsed just how potent the subtle threat could be. The morning light filtered through the latticed windows, but it did little to ease the tension that had settled in the palace. Whispers of shifting alliances and quiet threats still lingered in the corridors, creating an invisible web of suspicion. Today, you would face one of the most dangerous lessons in survival, the consequences of misplaced trust. Lien led you to a quiet chamber near the central hall. Even the most cautious may be deceived, he said softly. Trust, in this court, is a fragile illusion. One wrong assumption, one misplaced confidence, and your survival could be jeopardized. You observed as two mid-ranking ministers entered, accompanied by a junior official who had recently gained favor. Their conversation appeared cordial, punctuated by polite smiles and courteous bows. Yet beneath the surface, subtle cues betrayed tension, a hand hovering too long over a scroll, a deliberate pause before replying, eyes darting toward corners as if expecting unseen observers. The junior official, unaware of the undercurrents, seemed to accept the outward display at face value. He revealed minor details of his recent assignments, unknowingly exposing vulnerabilities. One of the ministers noted these details carefully, nodding in apparent agreement, yet the gleam in his eyes suggested calculation rather than benevolence. Lien whispered, "Watch. Even a smile can hide a dagger. Words meant to comfort may be used to manipulate." By midday, the consequences of misplaced trust became clearer. The junior official received a message that seemed innocuous, yet it contained subtle instructions that would place him in a position of vulnerability during the evening's council. Each step, seemingly routine, was carefully orchestrated to test his judgment, exploit his assumptions, and reveal his weaknesses. You noticed patterns emerging: the minister's gestures, the timing of their words, the placement of documents, all worked together to create an environment where the junior official's trust would be his undoing. Even the servants' movements seemed to participate in this silent orchestration, delivering messages and observations at precisely the right moments. Lien's voice was quiet but firm. This is the danger of trust in King Zhou's court. Even those who appear loyal may act against you if it serves their interest. Your task is not to assume honesty, but to discern intentions before accepting gestures at face value. As evening approached, the junior official was subtly maneuvered into a position that could expose him to criticism or punishment. He smiled politely, unaware that his misplaced confidence had set the stage for scrutiny. Observation, not participation, allowed you to understand the full scope of the manipulation without falling prey to it yourself. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the day's lessons. Trust was a currency, but one that could be weaponized against you. Survival required careful judgment, the ability to read beyond appearances, and the discipline to question even the most innocuous gestures. Every conversation, every smile, every gesture in the palace was potentially double-edged, and a single error in perception could prove fatal. That night, as you lay on your mat, you replayed the events in your mind, understanding the subtle orchestration behind each action. King Zhou's court was not merely a place of political maneuvering, it was a living web of observation, manipulation, and hidden agendas. And you had learned, painfully but wisely, that misplaced trust could be as deadly as overt hostility. The morning light barely pierced the heavy curtains of the palace chambers, casting muted patterns across the corridors. An unspoken tension hung in the air, heavier than any night patrol or whispered threat. Today, you would witness a silent betrayal, a subtle, almost invisible act that could change the balance of power without a single raised voice. Lien led you through a quiet passage behind the main hall. In this court, he whispered, betrayal rarely announces itself. It hides in gestures, glances, and unspoken agreements. The cleverest acts of treachery are invisible until the consequences unfold. You observed a mid-ranking official, whom you had previously noted for his seemingly cautious demeanor, moving discreetly toward a secluded chamber. He carried a scroll, but the careful way he avoided the main corridor suggested a hidden intent. Across the hall, another official, ostensibly engrossed in documents, lifted his gaze just enough to signal acknowledgement. The silent communication was unmistakable, a plan was in motion, invisible to the uninitiated. Minutes passed, and you traced the subtle movements. The first official left the chamber with the scroll, smiling politely as he passed other ministers. The gesture seemed innocuous, yet you knew from past observations that appearances here were deceiving. Lien nudged you slightly. Watch. The court rewards subtlety, but it punishes those unaware of it. Later, during a council session, the effects of the silent betrayal began to manifest. Decisions made earlier, which seemed straightforward, were quietly undermined by the introduction of selectively altered information. No one spoke openly of the changes, yet the intended outcomes shifted. A seemingly minor misstep by one minister caused a ripple that allowed another to subtly assert influence. You realized that the betrayal had been executed without confrontation, its success measured by the unseen manipulation of perception. Lien explained, this is the essence of silent betrayal. No accusations, no overt hostility. Just a careful orchestration of events that alters outcomes while maintaining plausible deniability. Survival here requires seeing these moves before they affect you, and understanding when to intervene and when to observe. As evening approached, the court buzzed with ordinary activity, unaware of the unseen currents that had altered alliances and power structures. Ministers moved past one another with polite nods and soft greetings, but beneath the surface, subtle hierarchies had shifted. Even the most vigilant observer could have missed the betrayal had it not been for the careful attention you had cultivated over days of scrutiny. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the lessons of the day. The palace was alive with hidden strategies, each act of betrayal potentially invisible until the damage was done. In King Zhou's court, even those who seemed allies could become instruments of subtle manipulation. Knowledge, observation, and discretion were essential to survive, and the line between survival and ruin could be as thin as a glance or a gesture. That night, shadows in your quarters seemed to whisper with hidden intent. Every movement, every step, every interaction in the palace could carry unseen consequences. You lay awake, understanding more clearly than ever that in this court, betrayal often came silently, and surviving it required a sharper perception than any sword could offer. The next morning, the palace was alive with quiet tension. Servants moved briskly but cautiously, and ministers exchanged glances heavy with unspoken messages. Today, you would observe the subtle art of veiled threats, the kind that concealed danger behind courtesy, where words could wound more effectively than any blade. Lien led you through the eastern wing, pausing at the threshold of a study where a meeting was about to take place. Veiled threats are everywhere, he whispered. They are disguised as advice, favors, or concern. The key is perception, you must hear what is said and what is left unsaid. Inside the study, two ministers engaged in a seemingly ordinary discussion. Their conversation was polite, punctuated with courteous nods and restrained gestures. Yet, each word carried layered meaning. Phrases like, "one must consider the consequences carefully," or, "it would be unwise to act hastily," were not mere suggestions, they were warnings, subtle indications that the listener's position was precarious. You noticed small signals, the slight tightening of a hand on the scroll, the measured pauses between sentences, the way one minister avoided eye contact. These gestures revealed tension, hidden scrutiny, and implied power over outcomes. Lien leaned close. The threat is not announced. It is felt. Those who understand it act with caution. Those who ignore it may find themselves compromised. Later, in the corridors, whispers reinforced the veiled threats. Servants hinted at mistakes, ministers commented casually on errors, and subtle glances suggested observation. You realized that the threat could take many forms, a note left on a desk, a word spoken to the wrong person, even a polite smile masking disapproval. Each action carried potential consequences. During a council session, a veiled threat became clearer. One minister spoke to another about recent assignments, framing criticism as advice. The recipient nodded politely, yet the measured tone revealed the subtle power dynamic: compliance was expected, and deviation could invite reprisal. The audience, unaware of the undercurrents, saw only civility, but the court's insiders understood the message. Lien whispered as you observed, "Notice the balance. A veiled threat relies on ambiguity. The target must interpret it correctly, or the message fails. But if misread, it can become a real danger." Survival is about understanding both the words and the intent behind them. By evening, you traced the subtle threats across the palace: who wielded influence, who observed, who waited for missteps. Every gesture, every word, every pause was a potential signal. The palace itself seemed a living organism, responding to perception and action with invisible pressure. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the day. Veiled threats were not confrontations, they were instruments of control, shaping behavior silently yet decisively. Survival depended on noticing them, understanding them, and navigating them without drawing attention. That night, shadows in your room seemed heavier, more deliberate. The veiled threats of the day lingered, a reminder that King Zhou's court was a place where danger rarely announced itself and where perception, timing, and caution were the only shields between survival and ruin. The following morning, the palace corridors seemed deceptively calm. Ministers walked with measured steps, servants moved with quiet efficiency, and even the sunlight filtering through the latticed windows carried a sense of restraint. Today, you would witness the subtle and dangerous nature of hidden favors, gifts or assistance that could bind loyalty, create obligation, or disguise an ulterior motive. Lien led you through a secluded corridor near the western wing. "A favor here is rarely innocent," he whispered. "It carries expectation, debt, and sometimes danger. Survival depends not only on noticing the gesture, but on understanding the motive behind it." In a small, private chamber, a mid-ranking minister handed a folded scroll to a junior official. The gesture seemed innocuous, a simple delivery of information, but Lien nudged you to observe closely. Watch their posture, their gaze, and their hands. Every detail is part of the favor's meaning. The junior official accepted the scroll with a polite bow, unaware that the gift carried hidden implications. The scroll contained advice, carefully framed instructions, and subtle guidance favoring the giver's allies. By accepting it without hesitation, the official inadvertently signaled compliance, loyalty, and indebtedness. One misstep in handling the favor, hesitation, refusal, or misinterpretation, could have immediate repercussions. As the day progressed, you noticed multiple hidden favors circulating among ministers. A quiet recommendation here, a brief mention there, each seemingly minor gesture was part of a delicate network of obligation. Lien whispered explanations: favors are weapons disguised as kindness. They create alliances, influence decisions, and shape perceptions without overt confrontation. Recognizing them is as important as knowing whom to trust. During a council session, the consequences of a hidden favor became apparent. A junior official who had recently received guidance from a powerful minister subtly adjusted his proposal, favoring the giver's interests. Observers might have seen only a routine decision, but you understood the silent chain of influence at play. The favor had shifted outcomes, strengthened alliances, and demonstrated how even indirect actions could control power. Later, in the corridors, you traced further subtle favors, whispered advice, discreetly delivered reports, and carefully chosen words. Each act reinforced obligations, created leverage, or subtly realigned loyalty. The palace was alive with invisible exchanges, each one a potential tool, or trap, for survival. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the lesson of the day. Hidden favors were more than gifts, they were instruments of influence, binding recipients into webs of expectation and obligation. Understanding the motive behind each gesture, interpreting its implications, and navigating its consequences was critical for survival. That night, as you lay on your mat, the subtle power of the hidden favor lingered in your thoughts. The palace was a labyrinth of obligations, gestures, and silent influence. Survival required vigilance, discernment, and the ability to act wisely upon what was offered, whether it appeared as generosity, guidance, or simple courtesy. King Zhou's court had taught you again, nothing was truly free, and every gesture, no matter how small, could carry consequences as sharp as a blade. The morning light barely reached the inner corridors, yet whispers of hidden activity already stirred among the palace walls. Today, you would witness the formation of a secret alliance, a quiet agreement, carefully concealed, capable of shifting power and influence without ever reaching the king's ears. Lien led you through the eastern wing to a small, discreet chamber where two mid-ranking ministers were meeting privately. Alliances are rarely announced, he whispered. They are forged in secrecy. Those who understand the rules of observation can see their formation before they are even official. The ministers spoke in hushed tones, their gestures calculated and precise. A slight tilt of the head, a carefully placed hand on the table, a measured nod, each movement conveyed consent, agreement, and understanding. The alliance was not merely a collaboration, it was a pact, crafted to advance mutual interests while minimizing risk. You noticed how the ministers referenced others without naming them, using cryptic phrases and subtle codes. One gesture, a brief glance toward a distant corner, indicated a potential threat. Another, a faint shift in posture, signaled agreement on a shared strategy. Lien's whispered explanation clarified the significance: the court rewards subtlety. Those who can negotiate power without visibility gain strength. Those who act openly invite scrutiny and danger. As the day progressed, the secret alliance's effects rippled across the palace. Ministers who had previously appeared autonomous began subtly adjusting their actions. Instructions were framed in ways that favored the hidden pact, and even servants and pages participated unknowingly, carrying messages and observing behaviors that reinforced the alliance's position. Later, during a council session, the power of the secret alliance became apparent. Decisions that seemed routine on the surface were influenced subtly by the aligned ministers. A phrase spoken at the right moment, a strategic hesitation, and a carefully framed proposal all advanced the interests of the alliance while maintaining the appearance of impartiality. The court observed civility, you understood the hidden dynamics. Lien leaned close as you traced the developments. Note how influence spreads silently. The alliance does not declare itself. It acts invisibly, shaping perception, adjusting priorities, and controlling outcomes. Those who cannot perceive it remain vulnerable. Those who observe carefully can navigate it to their advantage. By evening, the hidden pact had solidified further. Its members moved with confidence, subtly reinforcing one another while maintaining plausible deniability. The palace, alive with observation, concealed yet revealed the threads of this alliance in ways visible only to those with trained eyes. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the day's lesson. Secret alliances were the lifeblood of the court's hidden politics. They demanded discretion, careful observation, and an understanding of subtle power dynamics. Survival required not only noticing these arrangements but interpreting their implications accurately, adjusting one's own behavior to align or remain safely invisible. That night, as you lay on your mat, you realized the palace was more than a place of intrigue, it was a living network of hidden pacts, silent movements, and invisible currents of influence. King Zhou's court rewarded subtlety, patience, and perception above all, and the lesson was clear: to survive here, one had to see the invisible, understand the unspoken, and act with both caution and precision. The morning dawned gray and muted, a rare quiet settling over the palace that seemed almost deceptive. Lien's expression was serious as he led you through the corridors, speaking in a low voice. Today, you will witness the necessity of taking a calculated risk. In King Zhou's court, inaction can be as deadly as error. To survive, one must sometimes act despite uncertainty, measuring danger against potential gain. You were brought to a small chamber where two ministers, who had recently been observing one another cautiously, were now quietly negotiating. Their conversation appeared polite, but every word, every gesture, was measured, balancing advantage against exposure. Lien whispered, "Notice how each decision carries both risk and reward. A single miscalculation could lead to humiliation, or death. The ability to calculate risk accurately is essential." The ministers discussed the placement of influence within the court, debating whom to trust, whom to monitor, and whom to subtly undermine. A junior official, recently promoted and unaware of the underlying tensions, was used as a vehicle for testing reactions. One of the ministers suggested a seemingly minor action: sending a message, adjusting a schedule, or framing a proposal in a specific way. On the surface, it appeared harmless, but the potential consequences were enormous. You observed the junior official's movements closely. His compliance, hesitance, and even his body language could tip the scales. The ministers were counting on his reaction, using him as both shield and instrument. Lien's voice was steady. A calculated risk is never random. It involves anticipation, observation, and precise timing. The court rewards foresight and punishes misjudgment severely. As the day progressed, the subtle risk unfolded. A carefully crafted message was delivered to another minister, containing information designed to influence decisions while maintaining plausible deniability. The result was an almost invisible shift in alliances, yet the consequences were profound. Favor shifted subtly, attention focused where intended, and power began to realign. By evening, you realized the junior official had unwittingly played his role perfectly, allowing the risk to succeed without triggering suspicion. You noted the precision required, the timing, the delivery, the perception of harmlessness, all contributing to a successful maneuver. One misstep, however, could have reversed the outcome and endangered multiple participants. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the lesson. Survival in the court was not about avoiding all risk, it was about understanding it, measuring it, and acting decisively when the balance of danger and reward tipped in your favor. Every gesture, every whisper, every decision was a potential calculation, and even small errors could have severe consequences. That night, you lay on your mat considering the day's events. The palace seemed alive with invisible currents, each interaction a potential hazard or opportunity. You understood that survival demanded more than caution, it required observation, judgment, and the courage to act when the stakes were highest. In King Zhou's court, the ability to take a calculated risk distinguished those who endured from those who vanished. The palace awoke under a pale, cold light, the corridors quieter than usual. Even the usual hum of servants seemed muted, as though the walls themselves were aware of the danger that lingered invisibly. Today, you would witness how a dangerous secret could shape lives, influence decisions, and threaten survival in ways more potent than any sword or public decree. Lien guided you through a secluded passage leading to a small chamber rarely used by anyone except trusted officials. Secrets in this court, he whispered, are weapons. The right secret can elevate your position, the wrong one can end your life. Observe carefully, there is danger in knowing, and even more in revealing. Inside, two ministers exchanged hushed words, their voices barely audible. One produced a folded parchment, carefully concealing its contents. Lien motioned for you to lean closer but remain hidden. You saw how each gesture, the slow unfolding of the document, the careful glance toward the doorway, the measured bow, was part of a deliberate protocol, protecting the secret while assessing trust. The parchment contained information about recent manipulations within the court, subtle betrayals, shifting alliances, and hidden favors. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed trivial, to those who understood the palace's dynamics, it was explosive. The information could destroy reputations, undo favors, or realign loyalties instantly. Lien whispered, a dangerous secret is not merely knowledge, it is power with consequences. Holding it safely is a skill, revealing it carelessly is a death sentence. Even observing its exchange is risky. Your life depends on discretion. Throughout the day, the secret influenced actions across the palace. Ministers adjusted their interactions, subtly altering conversations, gestures, and decisions to protect or exploit what they knew. A simple nod, a delayed bow, or a carefully phrased remark carried consequences far beyond immediate perception. Even servants unwittingly became instruments in the management of hidden knowledge, delivering messages or observing behaviors that were quietly manipulated by those in the know. During a council meeting, the ripple effects became apparent. Decisions that seemed ordinary were now subtly shaped by the underlying knowledge of the secret. Officials aligned or distanced themselves based on what they suspected others knew. The power of the unseen document was clear, influence could be exerted silently, invisibly, yet decisively. By evening, you traced the web of implications, noting how fear, respect, and ambition intertwined. A single slip in judgment regarding the secret could have fatal consequences, while careful observation and understanding could provide unparalleled advantage. Lien's words echoed in your mind, the palace thrives on secrecy. To survive, one must not only perceive it but understand how it flows, who controls it, and when to act, or remain silent. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the lesson. In King Zhou's court, knowledge itself was a double-edged sword. The dangerous secret had revealed the invisible threads of power and influence, showing how survival depended not only on awareness but on the disciplined management of what one knew. That night, the shadows in your room seemed heavier, carrying the weight of hidden truths. Every corridor, every whisper, every gesture in the palace now felt imbued with the potential to harm, or protect. You understood, more keenly than ever, that in this court, survival required not only perception but judgment, discretion, and the ability to navigate the perilous currents of dangerous secrets. The morning sun filtered through the palace windows, illuminating the corridors with a deceptive calm. Servants moved silently, ministers walked with measured precision, and even the guards seemed unusually attentive. Today, you would witness the fragile and ever-changing nature of loyalty in King Zhou's court, a force more unpredictable and dangerous than open hostility. Lien guided you through the eastern wing, his eyes scanning the hallways. Loyalties here are never fixed, he whispered. They shift like sand. Allies today may be enemies tomorrow, and those who appear neutral may secretly wield the most influence. To survive, you must see the currents beneath appearances. You observed a group of mid-ranking ministers in discussion. On the surface, their conversation appeared ordinary, discussing schedules, ceremonial duties, and administrative tasks. Yet subtle gestures, a half-bow, a fleeting glance, the placement of a hand over a scroll, revealed layers of allegiance and suspicion. One minister, outwardly polite, subtly maneuvered to assert influence over another, indicating a quiet but deliberate change in loyalty. Later, during a council session, you saw these shifts reflected in action. Decisions previously supported by multiple ministers were now questioned, delayed, or subtly reframed. The balance of favor and influence was moving, almost imperceptibly, yet with potentially fatal consequences for those unaware. Lien whispered, "Notice who gains and who hesitates." Each choice, each hesitation, each word spoken or withheld reflects underlying loyalty, or the lack of it. Understanding this is key to survival. Throughout the day, you traced the subtle signals of shifting loyalties, whispers exchanged in corridors, private gestures of acknowledgement, the careful distribution of documents. Even minor actions, like the slight delay in a bow or a purposeful nod toward another official, carried meaning. You realized that loyalty in this court was not based on trust, but on advantage, perception, and fear. By evening, the realignment was apparent. Ministers who had been allied now avoided each other, while others subtly reinforced bonds, positioning themselves advantageously in the evolving hierarchy. You understood that survival required constant awareness, not only of your own actions but of the evolving attitudes of those around you. Even minor miscalculations in interpreting these shifts could invite suspicion or worse. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the day. The palace was a living organism, where allegiances flowed silently, and survival depended on perceiving these hidden currents before they became threats. Knowledge alone was not enough, understanding, timing, and discretion were equally essential. That night, as you lay on your mat, shadows seemed to shift with intent, and whispers carried the weight of invisible loyalties. You realized that in King Zhou's court, power was not fixed, trust was provisional, and only those who could perceive the subtle shifts in allegiance could navigate the dangerous maze of the palace and survive. The morning sun barely touched the palace floors, and the corridors seemed quieter than usual. The air felt thick with anticipation, though no one could say why. Today, you would confront one of the most dangerous aspects of King Zhou's court, the unseen enemy, the person whose threat is invisible, whose intentions are masked by politeness, and whose power lies in secrecy. Lien led you through a narrow passage behind the main hall. In this court, he whispered, the most dangerous enemies are those you cannot see, cannot predict, and cannot confront directly. They influence events without revealing themselves, shaping outcomes through silence, observation, and manipulation. You observed a minister, outwardly courteous and unremarkable, move through the halls. He spoke politely to colleagues, bowed carefully, and carried documents with calm efficiency. Yet subtle details betrayed his true nature, the way he paused briefly before passing a scroll, the calculated tilt of his head during conversations, the fleeting glance toward hidden observers. Each gesture revealed that he was aware of more than anyone realized, and that his influence could strike without warning. During a council session, the unseen enemy's impact became evident. Decisions were subtly steered, arguments subtly redirected, and priorities shifted without any overt action. Ministers who thought themselves in control found their proposals quietly undermined, their influence subtly diminished. The power of the unseen enemy lay not in confrontation, but in invisibility, controlling perception, creating doubt, and guiding actions without revealing intent. Lien whispered, "Notice how he moves, what he observes, and whom he influences indirectly. Survival here depends on seeing the unseen, understanding intentions without confirmation, and anticipating moves before they affect you." Later, in the quieter corridors, you traced the ripple effects of his influence. A whispered suggestion, a delayed delivery of a message, a carefully framed compliment, all contributed to shifting outcomes. Those unaware of his presence were manipulated without realizing it, while those perceptive enough could anticipate and adjust their actions accordingly. By evening, it became clear that the unseen enemy was everywhere and nowhere. His influence shaped alliances, decisions, and reputations, yet no one could accuse him directly. Understanding his methods required careful observation, knowledge of court protocols, and the ability to anticipate the hidden consequences of every interaction. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the lesson. In King Zhou's court, danger often came not from overt hostility but from those who acted invisibly. Observation alone was insufficient, understanding, discretion, and strategic foresight were essential. Even a single misjudgment could expose you to harm. That night, shadows seemed to move with purpose, and every whisper in the corridors carried hidden meaning. You realized that survival required seeing what others could not, predicting what others would not, and navigating a court where the most dangerous adversaries were unseen, their presence felt only through the consequences of their careful, invisible actions. The palace awoke under a pale morning light, and a tension hung over the corridors like a storm cloud. Today, you would witness how a single decision, carefully calculated yet inherently risky, could determine life or death in King Zhou's court. In this place, hesitation could be as dangerous as boldness, and misjudgment could have irreversible consequences. Lien guided you to a chamber where several ministers gathered, their conversation seemingly ordinary but laden with subtle signals. "A decision here is never simple," he whispered. "Every choice carries potential gain and potential peril. Those who act wisely may gain influence, those who hesitate may be undone." One minister proposed a minor administrative change, framed as routine, but the implications were far-reaching. It affected the distribution of duties, the attention of key officials, and even the perception of loyalty within the court. Others nodded politely, but the subtext was clear: disagreement, hesitation, or misinterpretation could prove costly. You observed the gestures closely, a slight frown, a delayed response, a hand resting over a scroll. Each nuance carried meaning, revealing underlying tension, ambitions, or caution. Lien whispered, "The court measures intention as much as action. Understanding the risk of a decision means reading the people as well as the situation." The junior official, recently gaining favor, faced a choice: speak up and risk offending a powerful minister, or remain silent and potentially compromise his own position. His hesitation was telling, his glances betraying uncertainty. Lien nodded subtly. "Even silence is a decision," he said. "And sometimes it is the riskiest one of all." As the council continued, the consequences of the risky decision unfolded. Small adjustments, a word spoken slightly differently, a gesture withheld, a recommendation reframed, altered the dynamics of the room. The officials maneuvered like chess pieces, each move measured against potential retaliation or reward. The junior official finally spoke, carefully crafting his words to balance caution with subtle influence. The response was measured but approving, a rare success in such a volatile environment. By evening, the ripples of the day's decision became apparent. Alliances subtly shifted, priorities quietly realigned, and reputations subtly strengthened or weakened. The risk had been calculated, but only because every gesture, every nuance, and every unspoken communication had been observed and interpreted. A single miscalculation could have led to humiliation, loss of favor, or worse. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the lesson. Survival in King Zhou's court depended not only on knowledge but on the ability to assess risk, anticipate consequences, and act with both courage and prudence. Every decision, whether spoken or silent, had the potential to alter the balance of power and life itself. That night, shadows seemed to linger longer, and whispers carried weighty significance. You realized that in this court, the difference between survival and destruction often rested on a single, carefully considered decision. Observation, perception, and the courage to act, all were essential tools to navigate the dangerous currents of power. The palace awoke under a gray, foreboding sky, the corridors unusually quiet, as if even the walls anticipated the unfolding of a dangerous plot. Today, you would witness the ultimate deception, a masterstroke of manipulation where appearances concealed intent, and even the most cautious could be misled. Lian led you to a secluded corridor near the king's chambers. Deception here, he whispered, is not obvious. It is layered, subtle, and nearly impossible to detect unless you are vigilant at every moment. Today, you will see how appearances can mask truth, and truth can be weaponized. Inside the council hall, a high-ranking minister spoke in measured tones, presenting a proposal that appeared straightforward. Yet subtle cues, the careful choice of words, the placement of documents, the timing of gestures, hinted at a concealed motive. Lian nudged you to observe closely. See the layers, he said. What is said is only the surface. What is hidden beneath can change everything. You noticed the reactions of other ministers. Politeness masked suspicion, nods concealed disagreement, and measured glances communicated silent warnings. Each participant played a role, balancing caution, ambition, and perception. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and the consequences could be catastrophic. As the session progressed, the deception unfolded like a carefully orchestrated dance. Minor suggestions appeared as helpful advice but subtly guided decisions in favor of the minister's hidden agenda. Documents were referenced selectively, creating impressions that supported one interpretation while concealing another. The room seemed orderly, yet every action and word had been calculated to manipulate perception. Lian whispered, the ultimate deception requires patience and timing. It exploits the assumptions of others, shapes reality without confrontation, and ensures that the deceiver remains untouchable. Only those who observe carefully can see the true direction of influence. Later, in private chambers, the consequences of the deception became apparent. Decisions influenced by the minister's subtle guidance quietly shifted alliances, altered priorities, and strengthened positions. Observers unaware of the hidden layers were misled, unknowingly advancing the minister's objectives. Even those with experience in court politics had to recalibrate their perceptions, uncertain of who could be trusted or what actions were genuine. By evening, the ultimate deception had reshaped the balance of power. Silent victories were claimed, alliances subtly strengthened, and reputations quietly enhanced or undermined. The room's apparent civility concealed the skillful manipulation that had taken place. You realized that survival depended not only on awareness but on the ability to discern truth beneath layers of artful deceit. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on the day's lesson. In King Zhou's court, deception was a weapon more powerful than any sword, capable of controlling minds, shifting loyalties, and determining fate without overt action. Only those who could see through the layers, anticipate the hidden intent, and navigate carefully could endure. That night, shadows seemed to move with hidden purpose, whispers carried subtle warnings, and every gesture you recalled felt charged with meaning. You understood that in this court, the ultimate deception was not an exception, it was a rule, a test, and a force that determined survival itself. The palace seemed quieter than usual, yet an undercurrent of tension lingered like a shadow that refused to lift. Today, you would face the culmination of all you had learned, a final lesson in survival at King Zhou's court, where every observation, every gesture, and every subtle interaction carried the weight of life or death. Lian led you to the main hall, where the day's council session was to begin. You have seen threats, favors, alliances, betrayals, and deceptions, he said quietly. Today, you will understand how they converge. Only by perceiving the full tapestry can one navigate the court safely. As ministers gathered, the hall buzzed with polite conversation, nods, and formal greetings. But beneath the civility, every glance, gesture, and word carried meaning. Alliances subtly reinforced, loyalties quietly shifted, and invisible threats hovered over each participant. You noticed a junior official, recently emboldened by small successes, hesitating slightly in his bow, a single imperfection that could invite scrutiny. Lian whispered, "This is the court's final test, to act with precision, to observe without being observed, and to respond without revealing yourself. Every decision is a measure of perception, patience, and judgment." Throughout the session, you traced patterns you had learned over the days. Ministers who had appeared loyal to one faction subtly redirected support to another. Hidden favors influenced proposals, and veiled threats guided responses. Even the unseen enemy, whose presence had been felt but not confronted, left ripples in the decisions of the council. The ultimate deception, layered and deliberate, shaped the flow of power without a single public accusation. You observed your own position carefully, noting that those who remained cautious, who measured every word and gesture, were the ones who maintained stability. The court rewarded subtlety, awareness, and discretion above all. One misstep, a glance, a delayed bow, a poorly chosen phrase, could undo a person instantly. But those who saw the invisible currents, who understood the hidden motivations, navigated the dangers and emerged relatively unharmed. By evening, as the council concluded, the full lesson became clear. Survival in King Zhou's court was not about brute force or open confrontation. It was about understanding the hidden mechanisms of power, recognizing the subtle manipulations of allies and enemies alike, and mastering the art of observation, patience, and calculated action. Returning to your quarters, you reflected on all you had witnessed, the fractured alliances, the hidden traps, the subtle threats, the dangerous secrets, and the ultimate deceptions. Each experience had revealed a layer of the court's perilous complexity. You understood that to survive here, one must see beyond appearances, interpret unspoken intentions, and act with both caution and courage. That night, the shadows in your room seemed alive with the echoes of the court. Every whisper, glance, and gesture you recalled carried new meaning. You realized that King Zhou's court was not merely a place of intrigue, it was a crucible, forging those who could perceive, adapt, and endure. And so, as sleep finally claimed you, the lesson settled deep within. In a court ruled by ambition, fear, and cunning, survival was not granted, it was earned, through vigilance, understanding, and the unerring ability to navigate a world where every moment, every action, and every word could mean life, or death.